Cultural images fueling our bias? So this is really interesting topic and question, being that my work deals with pop culture. So I'm constantly looking at images. I'm constantly looking at what's happening in TV, what's happening in film, comic books, all of that. So to think about this even in a deeper sense is really a good question to think about on a regular basis. So let's start out with this first image. So we have 2018 film Black Panther that comes out. And so here in this image, I remember when it first came out, as a huge comic book fan, I was on top of the world. It was finally being able to see a comic that I read and continue to read actually come to the big screen. And it became important because not just of the main character, Black Panther, who's played by the late Chadwick Boseman, but also the other characters that involved, particularly Nakia Okoye. So as a Black woman, I'm seeing these key figures that are actually also women and not just the focus on Black Panther or T'Challa. So seeing this image in itself, before even seeing the movie, I'm already excited. I'm hearing about other people's excitement. I can recall that this was essentially a huge event. People shut down theaters, or rented theaters rather. People came in costumes. People came in. It was almost like an Olympic event. It was a celebration of this being able to see a film come to light that many had said would never happen. And we'd also get a chance to embrace African culture, this idea of fantasy, and the fact that African Americans and those of the diaspora exist in fantasy. And so here, this is a particular image that resonates for those who at one time maybe thought they would never see themselves on the screen, that they would never see themselves in fantasy or in a world where comic books has been predominantly carried by white men. So this image in itself, like I said, before you even see the movie, offers an opportunity of what can be in Hollywood and what can be in pop culture. So this next image definitely hits the heartstrings. So you have 2-year-old Parker Curry, who's at one of the Smithsonian museums in Washington, D.C. And she's pretty much, engulfed by this image of Michelle Obama. She's literally at a standstill. And only one can imagine what she was thinking and what caught her attention, what brought her to just stand here and admire Michelle Obama in this portrait here. And, it got to the point where we even see it has resulted in the book here, Parker Looks Up, and this idea that representation really matters. And this idea of Parker's mother would say, only by being exposed to brilliant, intelligent, kind Black women can my girls and other girls of color really understand that their goals and dreams are within reach. And so Parker is not necessarily meeting Michelle Obama, which she would later, but the fact that she's seeing someone that looks like her, that's on this big canvas, and the fact that she also would see her on TV, it's almost as if she feels like she's close to her, and it encourages her, it inspires her. And this is a 2-year-old, so we're seeing how a particular image can inspire someone that's not necessarily an adult, but a kid, and how as kids, when we see images, we internalize them, we bring them in, and it, it can flourish and blossom in a good way, or it can be the opposite of that. And so the hope is that the cultural images that we do see, that they don't feel a bias, but if anything, that they feel a mode of confidence, empower, and push and motivate. Now, this next image, I also have a video that I'm going to play, is of Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, who is one of the key figures in the vaccine rollout of COVID-19. And this idea of seeing Black women in STEM becomes huge and important. And so let's actually see and how important this is. So let me share for you all. All right.
According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 6.5 million Americans have now received their first dose of the vaccine against the coronavirus. It's a number that will be growing every day, though it's well behind what public health experts had been hoping to see. Along with manufacturing and distribution issues, public health officials are concerned about millions of Americans who are resistant to taking the vaccine. To address that, some of those officials are shining a light not just on the science behind the shots, but on the scientists who help bring the vaccines to fruition. When the president paid a visit to the National Institutes of Health last March, the leads at the Vaccine Research Center explained their life-saving mission.
Why shake proteins that will bind?
The key to it, a 34-year-old doctor named Kizzmekia Corbett.
I was just there telling the task force about the work that we've been doing.
2 weeks later, Dr. Corbett's team began the first stage of clinical trials.
We have taken a lot of the knowledge that we have gained over the last 6 years and applied it to a fairly revolutionary vaccine platform in collaboration with Moderna.
That vaccine rolled out within 10 months.
The vaccine teaches the body how to fend off a virus because it teaches the body how to look for the virus. By basically just showing the body the spike protein of the virus, the body then says, oh, we've seen this protein before. Let's go fight against it. That's how it works.
For a lot of people, seeing you as the person who is part of this process, there's a trust factor.
To be honest, I didn't realize the level of impact that my visibility might have. I do my work because I love my work.
Dr. Corbett's interest in science began at an early age, but one opportunity made a key difference. She attended the University of Maryland, Baltimore County as a Meyerhoff Scholar, an aggressive program that mentors minorities and women in science. Graduates include Surgeon General Jerome Adams. Was she someone who's going to make it all along?
She was definitely going to make it in life.
Dr. Freeman Rabowski has been president there for nearly 30 years.
She had strong science background, but she also was very comfortable with people. We need more scientists who can connect to people. She could do that when she was 17 easily. What we do at UMBC is to support students of color, black, but also students in general, to make sure they make it in science.
Only 18% of all students graduate with a STEM degree, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. Around 2% are black.
It's important for those people to see people looking like them, like themselves, who can be involved. If it's about women or if it's about blacks, because it shows that you've got people who understand what you've gone through.
Dr. Corbett and I have worked together for maybe 15 or 16 years, since she was in high school.
Dr. Barney Graham's not only Corbett's mentor, he's her boss.
When you recognize somebody has special qualities, you need to do things that can keep those other things out of the way and avoid some of the dismissiveness that often happens, not only to minority people, but to women.
And historically, that bias strikes not just professionals in the field, but those that they serve. Well, let's talk about the impediments to the trust.
I grew up in Birmingham. All of my life, I was hearing about the Tuskegee study. The federally sanctioned Tuskegee experiment sought to examine the long-term effects of syphilis by letting infected black men go untreated with no regard to the suffering it caused.
How do you feel about being used as a guinea pig?
Well, I thought once he was pretty rough.
Another. All righty, so we go back to our slide here. So with that fact, Dr. Corbett mentions this idea of visibility. And I like to think visibility is important in how we figure out and decipher between biases. Visibility also impacts the images that we see or don't see. And as she mentioned, I just want to reiterate again, she says, to be honest, I didn't realize the level of impact that my visibility might have. I do my work because I love my work. So this idea of not realizing the impact that she had, further lets us know the ways in which images really can translate and really can make change for the good if used properly. And the fact that Dr. Rabowski mentions the importance of seeing people that look like them. So once again, when you think about the field of STEM and the fact that there is a lack of women and women of color that are that take part in STEM, it's important to see an image like this, especially one in which she is in a position of control, a position of, one might even say power, and the fact that here she is being recognized by the President of the United States. So others can feel as though, wow, I can get to that level where I have this national recognition or even international recognition. And this particular one image can really impact, those young and old being able to see themselves being represented. So yes, so what are biases? So biases, in essence, they're this natural inclination for and against an idea, an object, group, or individual. For the most, it's often learned and highly dependent on variables like someone's status, their race, ethnicity, educational background, and so many other different things. And at an individual level, bias can negatively impact someone's personal and professional relationships. And at a societal level, it can lead to unfair persecution of a group. So if we're assuming that, all Black people went through slavery, or everybody went through a particular movement, or the civil rights movement was only just about people having dogs sicked on them, or that water hoses were used. Yes, this is the case, but we also have to look at the whole entire picture of what happened and look at all the details so that we're not just assuming that people were trying to be malicious or that people were trying to not be fair, or if they were being fair, in what ways were they doing that? And so when we think about bias and then we think about images, images are not static. They do grab our attention, they incite, they alter our relations, and they tweak our beliefs, and they usher us into new worlds. In a way, they also provide a sense of connection and belonging. So if we look at the first two images that I showed, this idea of a connection to a community and to a world and to a unit and to a community, a sense of belonging, like I fit, I belong in this space. These are all things that images have the power of doing. And in many cases, they help us to understand the past, the present, and even potentially the possible future. Thus, it becomes important that we engage with the ways images are presented and used, and the fact that images do matter. And so examining and analyzing images is a large part of what I do as a researcher. And so to engaging in, like I said, within popular culture. But let's bring this, to kind of closer to home, and like as far as we're talking about unlocking health equity, we can think about the ways in which biases may or may not filter into the health world, and particularly if we're looking into medical TV shows and the ways in which biases and culture play a role there. So here we have, so this is where I will encourage those to feel free to offer their thoughts on here. So of these images of various medical TV shows, how many of these, or of these, which stand out for you all? So feel free, anybody, to jump in with their thoughts on which shows do they have resonated with them? Do they remember watching? Or what thoughts come to mind when they see these images?
I would say for me, art was the one that stuck the most. I remember sitting down watching that one all the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What brought you to watch it all the time?
I think at the time I wanted to be a doctor. And so I got to see the story of everything going on. And obviously there was a specific episode that I remember, can't remember his name, but he's the gentleman on the far left. And he was working with a young doctor that also was African-American. And they were talking about the affirmative policy. And I remember that being the highlight of the episode that I remember.
Gotcha. Okay, good. Thank you for that. One I'll put out there is, so as a kid, I watched MASH. And, similar to Roy, there was a moment where I wanted to be a doctor. So here we're watching this show about, in wartime, and, we're talking about military, you're talking about the hospital. And to show my age a little bit. So MASH came out 1972 to 1983. I was born in 81. So I'm young, when this comes out. But so I'm not thinking about the fact that there isn't anyone who looks like me as far as a doctor or as far as a nurse. For me, it's just a matter of, it's the medical field, and that's what I want to participate in. So watching MASH was comedy, it was drama, but it was also another entry point for me to say, oh, okay, so this is what doctors do on this particular level. I recently would watch Saint Elsewhere. So I didn't watch it when it first came out, but I'm on Hulu. So yeah, Hulu, you can watch all the seasons of that. And watching that, because I'm a huge Denzel Washington fan. And so at the time, this is very much, nobody's really knowing too much about Denzel. This is his early role here. So now we're actually seeing a person who is like me, who's a doctor. And then, but you also have, at the time they're referring to them as orderlies, you're seeing that huge presence. And so although some may see the presence of him, of the orderly, as someone who all he does is to pick up the trash, he plays a huge role in explaining his role and what he does and why he's significant and why you shouldn't just look over him. And so we might immediately put him to the side because of his role in the hospital, but not realizing his presence and his action and his confidence in what he does is pretty significant. Looking at Scrubs, this becomes one of those where like the comedy comes in to looking at the health field and how, yes, there are huge moments, there are trying moments, traumatic moments, but Scrubs offers a lightheartedness into the field, and many research has even said a realistic look into to the medical field, even though it does offer this level of comedy to it. And then you have various representations. So as we get beyond MASH and Saint Elsewhere, you see these newer shows like Chicago Med, The Resident, New Amsterdam, that are offering a different lens as who gets to be in these positions, who gets to be chief of surgeon, who gets to be head nurse, who gets to actually run a unit. And it's not just your white males that are doing it. Now you have women of color, you have men of color who are now presenting in these roles. And so there's a shift in diversity and inclusiveness. I would definitely say there's a need for more of this inclusiveness and diversity, but there definitely is a huge and a move and a large shift that is happening with regards to how we see these images presented, particularly in medical TV drama. Did anyone else want to add to as far as their thoughts on some of the shows here?
There's a comment in chat actually that said, I am aware that people with disabilities are absent from these images.
Yes. And so, and the only one that, if we're going to speak as far as on disability, would be The Good Doctor, as far as having, with him being autistic, but it's not a visible one. So yes, that would be, I would say, an image that definitely needs to be present for those to feel like we're a part of this discussion, we're a part of the equation. Yes, there are intellectual disabilities, but what about those who don't fall into that category? How do they see themselves fitting in? And not just seen as a token character, not just seen as someone who needs to be fixed, but someone who is actually, worthy of being seen and worthy of the role that they're taking on. So that yes, I agree, that becomes very important that in these particular images that I've selected here, we don't see that, and how that definitely needs to change and should change.
And someone just pointed out that there was a person in ER with a disability. There was a doctor, Laura Innes. I don't know if folks recall that.
Do they mind speaking further on that? I would love to get their thoughts on their representation in that role.
Oh, hi. This is Rob. I just remember she was one of the head doctors, and she had a physical disability. I'll see if I can research it and find out some more information for you.
Yes, thank you for bringing that into that example into discussion. And so, so just the fact that there's only few cases further lets us know that more is needed. And so, the fact that there may only be one, why can that not be a regular occurrence that we see? And so, disability is one of those topics that I think some people are scared to bring into the discussion because they're not sure how to handle it. But it's one of those where you have to have the discussion and you can't push away from it. And it's one of those things when we're talking about bias, you have to bring that into discussion so you're not appearing biased, that you're not including them into to the discussion. And it's all about acknowledging. It's all about learning. It's about educating so that we can decrease the amount of biases that do exist, because I will by no means say that biases will never exist. They will. It's in a way going to be part of the course, but it's in the way in how we handle those biases, and the images that create some of these biases is the true step there. All righty. Let's see. So with that, what can we do? So there's communication. So we have to communicate the bias. We have to communicate when it takes place. We have to acknowledge it. We have to recognize it. Otherwise, it's as if though it never did exist, or that these do not present themselves. And so communication is key. We always talk about communication, in relationship, communication in your professional and personal life. This also works in the ways in which we engage with images, cultural images, and bias. Also, there is the importance of encourage intergroup conversations. Now, I know this can be one of those ideas of like, oh yeah, we're gonna have these intergroups. We're going to, have the kumbaya, but you have to really be serious about wanting to have the conversation and what can be done after having the conversation, because it's more than just having the conversation. It's what do we do after we get this information? What do we do once we have the dialogue? We don't just sit on it. We pass it on to others. We share it with others, which kind of in a way goes back to the communication. We communicate to others what we learn in these conversations, because what we learn from the intergroup conversations may change somebody else's viewpoint, may change someone else's bias that they have about a particular idea, image, and so forth. Then you have to, immerse in the sense of, we can't just sit on the sideline. You have to dive into it. You have to get into the thick of it. Being on the sidelines only offers you a peripheral view of it. You don't really get to get the deep in-depth feelings of how these biases play a role in the ways in which they play a role. Expose. And so when I say expose and call out the behavior kind of go hand in hand. When you see it, you address it. You put it on, as some say, you put it on Front Street. You don't let it just pass and fester and build and grow more. Because as we, know with bias, they're learned. And if we continue it and carry it on and take it to the next person and to the next and to the next, it basically fuels into generations. And so if we go back to Parker Curry, we see this 2-year-old who sees this image and she understands what can be. And so, and when someone may say, well, no, Black women aren't presented in this way, or they're not seen in this way, then you have to immediately, reverse that and say, no, that's not always the case, or here is a case where it is not as such. And like I said, calling out the behavior can be uncomfortable for some. It can, it can make you feel as though, should I say something? What if I say something? How are people going to feel? What are they going to do? And so you have to sit with the uncomfortableness. You have to have those conversations with those who may get angry or may get defensive. But it's all, all of these, when you think about it, all work together. And it's the communication, it's the encouraging of the conversation, the exposing, the immersing. And when those all work together, we can have better results. We can really think about the ways in which the images that we present all the time, whether it's in pop culture, whether it's in the healthcare system, whether it's in our classroom, how do we fix those? How do we change those to be a better benefit? Before I get to that. So just knowing that by creating a less biased social system, there's no guidebook. There is no handbook to this. If anything, it's a constant work in progress. It's a constant changing of the format. But we can't be naive also to seeing that these images can play a positive role. But at the same time, we can't be naive to say that they will magically change the world either. We hope that could be something that will happen, but it's not necessarily, the case. So we have to be realistic. So like I said, I'm not just saying that let's post up all these pretty pictures and let's just say all of this happy things, because unfortunately, that is not the case. But we can play a role in the ways in which the positive pictures are presented. And if the negative pictures are there, how do we talk about them? How do we fix it? How do we change the nature of that conversation? So we never know what can, potentially be until we actually have the conversation. So I ask you all this particular question, do cultural images fuel our bias? Do they affect how you see things, how you operate, in whether it's personal and whether it's in your work? Do cultural images play a role in the decisions that you make? Do cultural images play a role in the way you deal with family and friends? Do you use those to have the conversations with them? Have they changed people's mind? Or is it that they're just simply for entertainment? And are we able to separate between the two of those, and how we move from that? So I leave you with this thought, we are only as blind as we want to be, from Maya Angelou. And I think this is very, straightforward. So when talking about biases and talking about images, there is no, fanciness to it. It is really pretty much very straightforward. And the only way things change is when we want to make that change, or when we want to recognize what is wrong and what is occurring within the use of the imagery. So like I said, you're only blind as you want to be. If you choose to carry on the bias and not check that, then that is something that, you have to recognize and acknowledge and be able to have that conversation, or know that will be called out on by others. So at the same time, I wanted to make sure to offer an opportunity to you all to kind of engage with this idea of cultural images and bias, and then maybe in what ways have you seen certain images, being used that may promote bias or maybe do not. So, yeah. So yes, so like I said, I know we do Zoom all the time, so I wanted to offer an idea so that me just not talking at you, like I said, and thinking about the ways in which, like I said, cultural images, what roles do they play as far as in your professional or even in your personal? So to open the floor up for you all.
Hello, I'm Shirley Helm. I'm from the Wright Center. I have been with VCU Health for quite a few years. We won't say how long, but I have a story to tell that VCU Health paid Disney this is, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, to come in, do consulting, like their service model, things like that. And they rolled out all these promotional materials, and, there was a little video clip, and, I'm a Title IX girl. Okay. I'm back when they told me I couldn't take shop and I couldn't run the mile and track, so that's my life experience. And so anyhow, Disney came into this, they showed this film and, promoted all this. And I watched the film and I came away really angry because the only leadership they had, and that nobody recognized this, were older white males. There were no females, nobody other than white males. And I was upset, number one, that nobody thought to look at this. And is that really representative of what VCU Health was, which to me said volumes more if they couldn't find anybody in leadership? Like, take a look inward. And, that's my perspective as kind of an older white female, but I think that translates to any group, and I think it's just the awareness of what you're looking at and asking questions. And maybe I'm looking at it incorrectly, but that's just my experience.
No, absolutely. Like, I like the fact that you're saying, asking the questions, So yes, you get this huge consulting big name to come in, but then we, totally dismiss the fact that we're missing the representation that we're needing and that we're seeking. And so yes, okay, that's great. You get Disney to come, but what does that really mean if we're not really factoring everybody into the conversation? How did that really help us? Did it really help us? So no, I think that's a very great point, the asking of the questions, and that we need to ask those questions. We have to ask those questions, or otherwise many will feel as though what they did was fine. And they figure, oh, well, maybe we'll bring them back again because no one said anything. No one felt, oh, this was, was wrong, or we should have changed or improved. And so, which goes back to the communication, which goes back to calling out, the behavior. We definitely have to, and it's going to be a regular thing. So I will not even sit here today and tell you that once we say it once, it will be all over. No, we have to continuously do it. It's almost like a second job, when you think about it, one that we don't financially get paid for, but in other ways, we reap the benefits of that. Other thoughts as far as how images have played a role or continue to play a role for them?
I was just going back to your listing of all the shows.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to recruit students for health administration. And when you look at the shows, the roles of the health administrators are usually portrayed in a pretty negative way.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know too many of the shows in depth, but there was Kelso and Scrubs, and then there was the lady in House who was probably one of the more positive ones, right? So it's also a way to highlight a profession as well.
Right. And the one thing that so I come from, like I said, I'm my interest is in popular culture and representation. And so for me, I see pop culture as a way to really inform and teach. And so it's not just simply as entertainment. We can use many of the episodes that we watch or the films that we watch as teaching tools. A big thing that I tell people is comics are not just for the sheer entertainment. Adults don't just read them, kids read them too. And so how can we use these shows to have dialogues? How can we use these shows to have conversations, to push what is already been presented? How do we rewrite the narrative, in a way, rewrite the script of what is present? And so we can critique them, but at the same time, the critique offers a learning lesson. And so, because I said, many people use these shows as ways to say, this is what I want to be. This is who I want to become. And so we have to talk about what's being presented so that those who do come forward, they understand the roles that are being played and what is presented to us.
I wanted to bring something up that I thought really stood out to me before you transitioned was, are we looking at culture as a way to, as a form of entertainment, but then also information as to what's going on? And so when we look at culture just from one image, I think we have to be mindful of culture can mean a million different things. And so there's one way we can look at it, okay, in the hip hop scene, what's the culture of that? And what do we see and how that affects? Some people would say, all people that associate with that act like this. On a bigger scale, I think for me personally, I'm always looking at advertisements and what I see on TV, and that gives me a pulse on how the states, or at least the people, the citizens, are reacting or whatever is trending. So for example, I noticed, after last year with the George Floyd and everything happening, that every commercial after that was actually, I was seeing more interracial marriages depicted in advertisements. The Cheerios commercial, different things like that. And we started seeing more diversity in that. And so I think if we can start looking at those trends, that would really help us understand where the climate is for us as individuals. And then we can go deeper thinking about, okay, well, what is the culture in this pocket? And is it only in the advertising, or is it only in health and medicine that we're now sharing that? And so I'm sorry if I'm going long.
Yeah.
Really important in that video that you shared was that they parlay that to saying that some people are still worried about the vaccine. And let's be honest, some people, they're talking about African Americans, right? Or people of color, to be wary, but then they show, okay, oh, we have someone that is part of this high level. So maybe if we can trust a person that's at the high level, more people will be interested and comfortable with taking the vaccine. And so being able to read and interpret that really helps you understand the dynamics and disparities in health. So I know that was a long-winded answer, but
no, thank you for that. Thank you. It's important that we really kind of dissect what we see, and kind of touching on what you were mentioning, I start thinking about what are the intentions with, as let's just think about marketing and advertising. So what are the intentions, and are they knee jerk? Are they reactive? Are they proactive? And then once they're present, are they continuous? Because for me, it's not just what you do in that moment, but what you continue to do afterwards. Because it's all great when you present it after, the big events have happened. But are you going to feel that same way 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 2 weeks from now, a week from now, a month, when something else happens? And so, we have to be careful in what is presented, because it can be even dangerous in the sense of that, oh, in this moment, this is how we feel. And then it changes and shifts. And so when you're thinking about that, people who might see that and didn't know about the prior incident, that's their first, introduction into it. So if that's their first introduction, they may expect that they're going to see this all the time. Whereas some of us are like, well, you know what, it's that time. So we're what we're gonna see today. I tell my students with regards to, I'll just put it out, the Black History Month. For me, it is a 365 effort. It's I don't downplay those who do celebrate it in February and then, but for me, it's an everyday effort. And so it's about encouraging and making sure that we continuously have the conversations all the time, so that it becomes regular, day-to-day narrative, learning and embracing. And the same with with marketing, the same with recruiting, the same with bringing different individuals in, not just because we want to check a box, but because we really are truly wanting to make the space better, that it's more inclusive, and that we're not just saying diversity for diversity's sake. So I know I'm getting close to my time.
I'm sorry.
No, I know I'm coming close to my time. So I just wanted to definitely, not soapbox anything, but definitely just say the importance of, consistency as well, as far as if we talk about other things we can do.
And there was a comment in chat talking about personality type and how that's depicted. And for example, that oftentimes female psychiatrists are shown maybe getting in a relationship with their patients.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And or that there is, some type of either relationship or some type of sexual personality attached to them, and that they just can't simply be a person who is helping out, that there is some more that has to be added to it, and that's not the case. We have to think about, and I think personality and bias kind of even work together. So that's even a whole nother dialogue in the way that we're portrayed, which makes me think about in Grey's Anatomy, Bailey, and how often sometimes she is seen as threatening, because, when she tries to take a position of power and authority, she's questioned. And it's like, but why? Nobody else gets questioned. And so, yes. And thank you, Shirley, for this. So yes, moving beyond that example. Okay, so that's good to know. I'm glad that you were able to, and you felt comfortable in doing that as well. Because, like I said, some are not.
No, I don't know about comfortable, but I'm just like, I say it like it is, and it doesn't. People don't intimidate me, which is probably to my detriment. But I think part of it is really feeling comfortable to ask hard questions, or not even hard questions, but just comfortable enough with coworkers or colleagues. And I have to choose who I do speak with about, just to have a better understanding. My life experience is not a coworker's, different times, different, I was rural, urban, whatever. And I think people avoid those questions of just helping to understand each other. And I think that's really sad, that we can't just take it without immediately reacting against it.
Right, because it's, it's a learning process, and the quicker we are able to, move out of our discomfort or our uncomfort, the better we can make, this change. And I know that may sound like, like a cheese and I, but it's really true. Like the quicker we are able to understand that, guess what, I'm not going to be right, and I may have a difference of opinion. So let's talk about that difference of opinion. How do we have that dialogue? What can, because what
Right.
you share with me might change my perspective, it might change my bias.